So hello again. I'm Sqn Ldr Sargam Tatwawadi. I'm an ex-Air Force officer. I was in the Air Force for 10 years in the Air Defense branch, post which I was conducting the personality and behavioral assessment of pilots for Indigo. And later on, I was with Jet Airways as manager of flight operations and training standards. Today's webinar will be in two parts. First, the presentation by Captain Amit Singh, and that will be followed by a question answer session. You can keep posting your questions in the chat box throughout, and we will try and answer as many as possible at the end of the show. Captain Amit Singh is a fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society. He's been an aviator for the last 30 years and is a training and safety specialist. He is also the author of the blog mindFly. I now hand over to Captain Amit to start with the presentation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome on board mindFly. I hope everybody is safe and maintaining a safe distance. We're taking advantage of this time to have a fruitful discussion on a topic which is, I feel, very important and crucial as far as the training is concerned. So I have a short presentation from my side, then we can have a discussion which can go on further. The subject I chose was trainer as a subject matter expert. So there are different training methodologies around the world. So we have the prescriptive method of training, which is quite limited since it is repetitive in nature and it is not real time connected to your environment or your aircraft. So we had the advanced qualification program, ATQP. Then we had EVT, which was kind of competency-based training. And now IQ is moving on to competency-based training and assessment, CBTA, which is a more dynamic form of training and very flexible, oriented towards the trainee. As we look at the trainer, so we need to find out what level of competence is required or desired of a trainer, be it a flying training captain, an examiner, or beyond. If we go further into the subject, you must have heard of Gladwell and his 10,000 hours rule, that if you have 10,000 hours of practice, you can be an expert in any field. Unfortunately, that rule is turning out to be a bit of a misnomer, even by those who proposed it. So they said he got it all wrong. And there were certain specific words, objectives he missed out. So the 10,000 hour rule does not hold good because purely by practice, you cannot achieve that level of mastery or expertise. What is really required to become an expert is something very different. Now, if we look at different fields, we'll get a fair bit of idea what role does practice play into it. So as per the study by Princeton University, practice makes in games 26% difference, in music 21%, sports 18%, education only 4%, professions 1%. So what is the key difference? It is not just practice. The key word here is deliberate practice, which means you have to be focused. So by playing a game for so many number of hours or a musical instrument, you cannot become an expert unless you have in-depth conceptual knowledge and it is a deliberate action. So that is what Gladwell and the famous 10,000 hour rule got it all wrong. In any context, more so in aviation, the role of a trainer is vital. The trainer is the bridge between the content and the trainee. So the trainer is, in the current role, a facilitator, helps the content pass on to the trainee, gets a feedback, manipulates, moves things around, does some analysis of what's working, what's not working, gives a feedback to the training department or the database so that it can be modified. So it is kind of a quality check, plan, do, check, act. And you come back stronger and more confident so that the needs of the trainee are addressed. If you look at any profession where you have experts like in architecture, design, painting, the experts stand out from the lot. So as you say, the boys and men, so how do you differentiate? So the experts have a definitive body language, they have a vocabulary of their own, they talk differently. So that's one way of basically identifying who's an expert. A trainer as a subject matter expert in the current phase of competency-based training or CBTA. If you take an example of solely communication, which is one of the competencies, let's see how it plays out. And while I am going through this short presentation, you can recall your trainer, your model trainer, the good and bad ones, and how do they compare. So that at the end of it, we can have a discussion of are we heading in the right direction or not. One of the competencies, communication, is defined that the pilot communicated effectively by regularly demonstrating all the performance indicators when required, which enhanced safety. So you have descriptors and behavioral indicators. So when a trainee is being assessed, so the trainee is being assessed on this, whether the communication was effective. Now, ICAO has defined the English language proficiency, and there are certain grades which are called holistic descriptors from level 1 to level 6. So everyone would be level 4 and above to be operational. Level 4 is the minimum standard, which means that the person, the trainee, is able to put his message across. So they could be a non-native English speaker, but so long he or she is following the SOPs, standard calls, the message is conveyed. So the message is conveyed, which means safety is enhanced. Even though that person might not be able to communicate effectively other than beyond the SOPs, but so long SOPs are being done properly, it is good enough. But holistic descriptors are not the BN. The holistic descriptors are broken down into subtasks or chapters. So when an examiner assigns you level 4 or level 5, she or he should have assessed you on the analytical descriptors, which are here. There are 10 of them: proficiency, structure, dialect, rhythm. So when during your simulator or any other training or assessment, if, for example, the trainer assesses you that communication was poor, which means he should have looked at the analytical descriptors and assessed you who are in those descriptors, and then reach to a final conclusion, which is the holistic descriptor. So what I mean to say is that the trainer should have in-depth knowledge of the analytical descriptor to give a good feedback to the trainee, as well as to the database or training department in the learning management system, so that whatever changes need to be made in terms of standards and correction, they can be put into effect as soon as possible when you have an accurate feedback. If the feedback is not accurate or subjective or biased, then the whole system, the database, gets corrupted. So you get a good feeling that, yes, your people are passing with level 5 or level 6, you're doing good, but actually you're level 4 or level 3. So that feedback, it is important that the competencies and the breakdown should be known by the trainer. There's some airlines which provide a very short course to the trainers. So those I feel are not good enough for them to absorb what is required and give a good feedback, be meaningful. The origin of competency-based training was in the field of education in the 1960s in USA. Imagine it started in 1960s, reached aviation in 2000 something, 2006. Why it started? Again, the focus was on trainers because the standards of education was dropping. So there was a need to enhance the standards. So they looked at the trainer. So again, I say the trainer is playing a very vital role. So the training of teachers was looked into and only competent teachers were allowed. So the word competent comes in. The idea was to produce high level, high standards of trainers by verifying the competence, which means the trainers were also checked and standards were maintained. That time there was an oversupply of teachers, so they could afford to do that. Again, the quality of the teachers was an issue and the certification procedures. So all these things we have seen over and over again, the training of teacher, the vital role. So the competence of teachers, quality and certification are the key words. If you look at the ideal trainer, so what would an ideal trainer be? This is not from aviation, but education in other fields. If you're conducting a training, then it is a matter of credibility that you should have good level of knowledge. So unless you have knowledge of a subject, conceptual knowledge, you will not be able to convey what you're trying to say, because a trainee can ask you a question from any part and any which way. So he can ask you a very silly question, a very basic question, which at times a lot of people get stuck with because they're not able to explain, again, because they have moved ahead. So the foundation has to be strong, which means back to the basics is very important. You should not leave the basics, since that is a safety issue. Now, EASA has made a safety issue of the training curriculum, the examinations, the multiple choice question and answers. So they said 85% of the people who cleared the type rating did not have conceptual understanding of the subject. So they decided to shelve it, and they went back to the demonstration of what people used to do in the school. The physics and chemistry, you have to demonstrate that you have knowledge. So that is how, in case of a tight situation, an emergency, your recall is faster if you have a good conceptual knowledge. So the trainer, therefore, must be armed with the best of the competencies to elevate the levels of training. So the trainer is responsible for the trainee as well as the training standards itself. A subject matter expert is a person with bona fide expert knowledge and what it takes to do a particular job. So he should know his job well, not just being a pilot and competed as a pilot, but as a trainer, there are different competencies of managing the training and the training curriculum. Dreyfus, the American professor, the two brothers, Dreyfus and Dreyfus, University of California, they came up with a skill development. So how is skill developed, the different phases? If you see here, the mountain starts with a novice. At the base of the mountain, no professional experience. So he is a clean slate. He or she, being a clean slate, is easy to develop as compared to somebody who comes with past experience. So a trainer needs to have that level of understanding and experience to determine what are the needs of the trainee. Next is a beginner who can note meaningful components. So the beginner starts to get to know the aircraft, the SOPs, and begins to put things together. Next is competent. Competent, when a person is competent, they understand the long-term goals, which mean they can operate the aircraft with the company SOPs within the limitation of the AFM or the FCOMs. So they can apply your heuristics, your rules, your goals, and meet your objective. So this is the basic minimum which is required, and we draw the line here. Anything below is not acceptable. So competent is minimum. Proficient is a person who perceives the situation as a whole. So now beyond the SOP, you get to have a bird's eye of what's happening. So if you're going from A to B to C, point to point, then a person who is proficient can find shorter routes, more fuel efficient routes. He can think at the same time, manage his own things. So he is a step beyond. Expert is a person who has intuitive grasp. Now we need to understand an expert is not a person who is competent or proficient, but a level beyond. So the expert may not always comply with SOPs, but stays safe. So intuitive feeling, intuitive decisions. For example, if you have a trainee who's trying to figure out a waypoint on the map, so a trainee will go from A to B to C along the line, trying to figure out where that waypoint is. But an expert will come, hover overhead, and he will point with his finger. They should be somewhere around here, and very quickly he'll find the map, the waypoint on the map. So an expert works intuitively. He knows exactly where to go. He knows the paths. He has the ladder. Whereas the competent and proficient person, they will toe the line that we will not deviate from the SOPs because they don't know what's beyond that. So the expert has that vision. What is competent? Basically coping with crowdedness. So you're just getting used to the SOPs. There are too many things on your plate. So you're managing what's on your plate. So if you're able to manage, you're safe. So that is being competent. Now sees actions at least partially in terms of long-term goals. So you're able to see the end of the flight that I have to achieve this. I have to, what is my destination, the weather at destination, what is my alternate. So a safe flight path can be performed. Next is conscious deliberate planning. So you have to think and refer to the relevant chapters or aspects to do your planning. Standardized and routinized procedures. So there is no variation, there's no deviation. A person is competent. So as per Dreyfus, competence is the climax of the rule-guided learning and discovering how to cope with crowdedness. So basically, end of the rule-guided learning is competent. Next is proficient. So in our industry, all these terms are used interchangeably. You might be hearing competent, proficient, expert, competence, and proficiency or proficiency, competency. So they're almost similar, but have very different meanings. They're not interchangeable at all. Now, level above proficient is a person who sees the situation holistically rather than some aspects. So you can be on your flight, but you can be 5 steps ahead. So you can see, you can have a different view as compared to the other crew who are still rule guided. Sees what is most important in a situation, perceives deviations from the normal pattern, decision making is less labored, and uses maxims for guidance whose meaning varies according to the situation. So as per Dreyfus, the progression from proficiency finally happens when the decision making and situational understanding becomes intuitive rather than analytical. So you have moved away from rule making. You know that in this situation, this is what normally I should expect or beyond that. Now, if you look at expert no longer relies on rules, guidance, guidelines, or maxims. Intuitive grasp of situation based on deep tacit understanding. So again, the conceptual knowledge has to be good for an expert. So if you ask an expert and a novice, if you give them the same mathematical problem or a situation, so maybe a novice will arrive to the destination faster than an expert, because an expert doesn't think in a linear fashion. He goes in an abstract way, thinks of new, you might be thinking of new ways of reaching the place or new solutions. So an expert basically uses his knowledge and abstract thinking to come up with something new, which could be better or could enhance the whole setup. Analytical approaches used only in novel situation or when problems occur. Vision of what is possible. So Dreyfus acknowledged the expert will deliberate before acting on some occasions because the outcomes are particularly critical. So an expert will not always do what a competent or a proficient person will do. They will not always refer to the rules because they work intuitively. But when the stakes are high and the situation is very critical, then of course, they will come back to the rules and see what the rule says. So they have that flexibility. They leverage their powers and vary between a competent person and an expert person. So they have that knowledge and understanding of the subject. So question again arises, if you look at the Dreyfus levels of skill acquisition from novice to expert, so where should the trainer be? Competent, proficient, or an expert? Competent is like I mentioned level 4, which is the basic operational level. But a person who's teaching somebody else should ideally have knowledge, skills, and attitude, which is better than a competent person. Or maybe expertise in some areas. So being just competent, can the trainer evaluate the trainee on the competencies? So if suppose I am a trainer, I am myself at level 4 in communication, how do I evaluate or assess a trainee who is level 6? So that is the problem we are facing. If my knowledge is limited, how do I assess a person who has higher knowledge? Unless I myself become an expert or not expert in every field, but certain fields. Trainer is expected to evaluate all the competencies, whereas their core flying skills is the competency. So that is what a pilot is supposed to do, flying. So that is their core competency. So beyond that, a trainer needs to move on to competencies of managing the curriculum, managing the session. So those are also well laid in the competency-based training and evidence-based training. But the differentiation is that there is no separate, there is a curriculum for assessment and evaluation of trainers, but the competence levels are the same. If you look at competencies of a trainer, so the EBT manual gives these 8 competencies, now 9 competencies. But if you look at the wordings, it says the EBT instructor should demonstrate the ability to accurately assess crew performance in the following areas of expected competence. So what is expected competence? That is not well laid or defined. So these are certain gray areas. Again, when we come to the assessment of the evaluator, the instructor, so again, the effective performance, the potential instructor should be able to demonstrate effective performance of all the mentioned competence. And it is recognized that existing instructors may need additional training in order to effectively conduct EBT. So what is effectiveness? So that is what needs to be defined accurately. But then everything becomes subjective to the person who is assessing, and then the biases come in. So this is an extract of the IATA guidance manual for instructor evaluation. The benefit of using competencies. Now this mentions words like mastering. So Now you've heard competency, proficiency, expert. This is mastering. If you see the actual world and what the book says, mastering is the highest level which can be attained beyond being an expert. So after expertise is mastering. But what the guidance manual says, mastering is defined set of pilot competencies should enable pilot to perform his routine duties and manage unforeseen circumstances, which cannot be trained in advance. So mastering a normal pilot will not be able to do that, will not be able to achieve. Similarly, for then instructor, again, similarly, mastering set of instructor and evaluator competencies. So again, the same manual gives so many terminologies which tend to change. Whereas the people who coined these terminologies has had very definite steps in mind for development of skills. So if we stick to those steps, then people are clear of where they stand. Otherwise, it's all gray. Beyond competence, it is all gray and subjective. So if you look at mastery, it is not a synonym for genius or giftedness. Somebody whose genius is not a master. Mastery is not a function of genius or talent. It is a function of time and intense focus applied to a particular field. Another definition is, it is not about perfection. It is about a process, a journey. So it is about the intrinsic motivation. So you have external motivation and internal motivation. The difference is, for external motivation, for example, you are working for appreciation, that people appreciate you. That is external. But intrinsic motivation will be if you're working for your satisfaction. So you are working for yourself, not for somebody else. If you work for somebody else, you kind of become a slave to what they're offering. So if somebody keeps appreciating you, you tend to become a slave for appreciation. So you tend to lose the meaning then. In fact, there have been studies done in US wherein if the level of appreciation increases beyond a point, the effectiveness of the workforce keeps dropping. So a number of universities have tried it out and all of them have seen the same result. If, say, if you're a good performer in any corporate, you're given some bonus, better performer, more bonus, top post performance, best bonus. But the person is now working for the bonus. He does not love the job he's doing. He's working for the bonus now. So then his performance starts dropping eventually. So intrinsic motivation when lost basically affects your performance. This is a graph of a generic industry, you can say, expected pattern of competencies. So when you begin, you start from awareness. You have awareness of something. Then you begin to find your feet, understand, then ability to do. You start doing things. Then comes competence, excellence, and fitness. At the bottom, if you see supporting, so people who are aware and understand things, they're in the supporting roles. Then when you're able to do and become competent, you're in the enabling role. Then central role. And when you become an expert, in the essence, in the core. So number of people drop as you go high and become specialists. If you see in the medical field also, you have specialists. So you have a person who can, general physician, who can look at anybody, but he cannot be a specialist. He cannot give you specialist advice. If you want to go to a lawyer for some advice, you will not go to a competent lawyer. You will want to go to an expert lawyer, because you want professional advice. So that is why for a trainer, it is better to be proficient and above, not just competent. So you have generalist. So you can equate them to your line captains or line pilots who are performing every day and complying with company SOPs. Then you have specialists. So now you need to define who specializes in which field. So a trainer by default cannot be a specialist in all the fields. So a trainer cannot follow all this graph because he needs to be specialist in a particular field or in a few fields rather than all the 9 competencies. As I said before, there are some corporates which give a short-term course, 7-day course, and overnight from a normal routine pilot or a routine instructor, you become a subject matter expert. In advanced qualification program, the requirement in the FAAC advisory circular is that the trainer needs to be a subject matter expert. So to comply with that, a few companies may say that the trainers are deemed to be subject matter experts. So by doing that, they just don't become. So they're in fact doing a negative, that is giving a false hope or a false positive. In terms of safety, we said a false positive is bad because if you do training and safety feels that we have carried out training, so the system is safe, which is giving them a false hope, because the thing will crumble under pressure since your foundation is weak. So in conclusion, I would like to say that the role of the trainer is critical, and there needs to be a way to define the competencies and behavioral aspects, the indicators of a trainer as compared to a normal pilot. Even though IATA does define, but the first thing they say that the pilot has to be competent in the piloting skills. So again, you put him back in the same bucket of a pilot. So he needs to have a higher level of knowledge, skill, and a better attitude. And the aptitude also needs to be tested for a instructor. So a trainer needs intensive training, needs to specialize in any of the subjects, be it automation or design, curriculum design. So you need to have specialists in those roles. Competencies and observable behaviors of the trainer needs to be defined in a better way as compared to the current. Trainers should aim at becoming an expert in certain core competencies in order to deliver the content with confidence and provide accurate feedback. Inter-rater reliability needs to be improved through training and standardization, which means if 10 people are evaluating the same person, they should not have a big variance of evaluation. Somebody gives a 4, somebody gives a 6. So the grouping of the rating should be small. So that is inter-rater reliability. Your rate, the people who are rating are reliable. They rate reliably. The world has moved on from inter-rater reliability also. So they need to have inter-rater accuracy. Trainer needs to be an expert in the following field and at least proficient in the remaining competencies. So what is a pilot born to do? The flying skills, automation, knowledge, and procedures. So you need to be an expert in all these, which means high level of competency, and other things may be proficient in those, which are your conduct of training and those aspects, the soft skill aspects. So that is from my side, training as a subject matter expert. I'm trying to basically differentiate the terminologies because every term has a particular meaning, how you move from one aspect to another aspect. So being just competent, which the current system says that a trainer also needs to be competent in these competencies, is not good enough, because ultimately the trainer has to evaluate and differentiate. If there is a fine line of differentiation, then the trainer and his understanding of the subject will decide where the trainee stands. Is it a level 4 or a level 5? So it all depends on the level of the trainer's competency. Now we can have a discussion, or if we have chats, then I'll try to answer the chats based on my research. Of course, everybody will have a viewpoint of their own, but the whole idea is to discuss this issue because of its critical, the nature of criticality, since the trainer is supposed to give a feedback in the learning management system, which is supposed to take care of further learning and variance, adaptability, and ultimately revision of the training curriculum. So unless this subjectivity and the bias is removed, which means give more specific emphasis on the training and evaluation of the trainers by the trainers. So I think this is the core area where we need to focus. That is what my thinking is and the reason behind choosing this subject. What is displayed is the email ID, the blog, the Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. You can post your comments and suggestions anywhere, and I'll make my best effort to get back to you. And with this, I hand over the presentation to Sargam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Captain Amit. We already have a few questions coming in. So the first question is from Nikhil, who asks whether does being proficient or an expert mean that a trainer will have to achieve a grading of 5 in all 9 competencies?
Well, 9 competencies, a trainer has to be proficient in her core competencies. Core competencies are basically what is desired of a pilot. So when you are a line pilot, you have certain competencies, so you need to have at least those. So a trainer has 9 plus certain other competencies to become a evaluator. So of course, yes, he has to be above in all the 9 competencies. That is what my feeling is. But the system, if you see the system from the perspective of advanced qualification program, says the trainer has to be a subject matter expert, which means that he has to be even higher than a proficient person. But if you look at the competency CBT, so that simply says that the trainer has to be competent. So what is the background of it? Because they haven't differentiated too much or given specifics. In the evaluator's handbook of which IATA has issued, IATA says that the pilot, the evaluator has to be competent in the core competencies of a pilot. Plus, there are certain 4 or 5 more competencies of an evaluator, which he should be competent. So, of course, yes, as far as I'm concerned, my thinking is that the level should be a proficient in all.
Yes, the second part does say is achieving a 4 or 5 in all competencies is a reality, which is where I think the aptitude, the attitude comes in. And I think it is really important to achieve a 4 or 5 minimum. So, all right. We have another question from Uruj, who says, why don't we get FPA for TM?
Pilot monitoring is the least trained competency. In fact, the French authority BEA has come up with a study that it is highly unsafe because there is no specific standards of training the pilot monitoring. We have IATA has come up with pilot monitoring manual, but what the French authorities have seen that in case of a high stress situation, and they have other agencies also they have tracked through retina tracking, they know where the pilot monitoring is watching. So they've seen that the pilot monitoring does not know where to look in case of a high stress situation. So pilot monitoring skills, if I give you an example, simple example, what is a pilot monitor supposed to do? Monitor his instruments, his or her instruments, the secondary instruments, the captain's instruments, the captain's physiology, the captain's psychology. So that is something which is too much to demand from a person on the right seat, depending on the experience level. So there has to be some way of putting it down on black and white, the minimum required to do in a particular phase of flight. So that is a subject which again, a pilot, an instructor sitting from behind cannot assess. Certain airlines, like I think Emirates is using retina tracking, so they can record where the pilot monitoring and the pilot flying are looking. Are they in the cognitive role, which means they know when their pupils start dilating, so that is you're thinking too much, or are they fixated to some particular instrument, or they're looking at the wrong instrument. So typically an instructor evaluator sitting from behind cannot make out what exactly the crew is looking at. So a level of feedback is lost, a layer of feedback because of this issue. So that is, pilot monitoring is again a separate, whole new issue, which needs to be and plays a very critical role. In my previous webinar, I had also raised the issue of this San Francisco overflight of the taxiway, the role of pilot monitoring and the standards. They follow advanced qualification program. So the pilot monitoring in that particular flight, where they missed for the 3 aircrafts on the taxiway by about 10 feet, he had been failed twice in his command upgrade. And the comments written were poor situational awareness and poor CRM skills. But when he was requalified on the right seat back as a co-pilot, the comments were totally different. The comments were good situational awareness and good CRM. So it is difficult to comprehend how a person can improve overnight. But as I said again, even in advanced qualification program, it all depends on the trainer and his capability and the ability to write reports. The detail and the particular words he chooses to write the reports matter. So the person, the instructor who cleared that pilot monitoring in his check did not see the consequences of his actions till the moment they had a near incident or accident. So you cannot see far beyond. So if you are an expert, like I said before, you work intuitively and you have a vision that if I compromise on this aspect at this stage, this will have repercussions later. So those are the things. That is why it is now being insisted that you have to stick to the grading score, because a person sitting somewhere who has made the curriculum knows what's going wrong. So the subjectiveness needs to be removed.
All right. I have a question though, that right now we don't have any trainer aptitude tests or any standardization, so to say, of in India. So do you think there is a model that could be developed and which would help us?
Of course, when you have psychometric evaluations, aptitude tests during induction as a pilot, then that is basically lost down the way. That becomes an HR exercise. Yeah. So once you start flying and you have issues online or offline, then you have to correlate with what was the finding of the test. So one, to predict or to confirm what has happened. And second is to ensure that your system is working fine and need not be tweaked. So if you're getting false indications, then there's something wrong with the selection system. So at every stage, there has to be a connect and there has to be a cycle. So aptitude test is a must to get a prediction of what can possibly happen. It cannot be very accurate because your behavior, your attitude can change depending on your circumstances. You live in a society, the pressure of the society or the corporate pressure can basically change your behavior all of a sudden. We have seen that in German Airways accident. So it is one person. So if you identify a streak, which means there's a red flag, so you must not let it go away without taking action on that. So even for a trainer, when the trainer is performing such a critical role, like grading a person, so if he's too lenient, if you see a person who's too lenient or who cannot take up a stand, so then ultimately he's compromising on your standards. So again, if he's not able to write reports or if he's speech recessive or not able to give a proper feedback, so again, these are certain issues which are very important. So it is a must, even though regulator does not mandate, but attitude test, psychometric is critical, even for a trader.
Yes, and I think that will also ensure that we are at a minimum level 4 or 5 as we begin.
Correct.
All right. So there is is one question from Ghansham Acharya, who says, is there a practice of second opinion, like in the medical world, if the trainee blames the trainer did not impart skills to the desired level? Is there an option of taking a second opinion? I don't think so.
Oh, there are, if you have a standard system, so you can have an appeal, system of appeal. So you can go for an appeal. So it all depends on the company's training policy.
Operator and the airline.
Because the instructor or the examiner may not be the final role. At the end of it, what are you challenging? You're challenging something which is not recorded, which is subjective. The whole issue is you have an aircraft wherein you have 25, 30 hours of data recorded, but on a training session, there is no recording. You can have a video recording, but the data is not recorded, which is easily achievable. So that can be corroborated with your actual performance, basically, to find the difference. And even for a positive thing like training feedback of how did the trainee perform, even now you have in development, you have artificial intelligence in training. So for example, artificial intelligence will be trained on how a particular maneuver will be performed on the simulator. And the trainee, when performing the exercise live, is given a feedback by artificial intelligence. For example, if the bank is less, the feedback will be given, the bank is less as compared to what is required at this stage. So we have so much of data which is lost and not used. So instead of going for a second opinion, of course, in medical field, you have your report. So it is all about analysis. How do you look at the report and analyze that? And in the aviation field, it is again, if you have data, like safety has so much of data, so you need to know how it happened. What happened, everybody knows. So how is a matter of analysis? So again, that is a skill of a trainer, root cause analysis.
All right. So Nikhil has another question who says that some facilitators do not provide any instructions like a CRM facilitator. So he would not possibly have the same knowledge as some psychologists in the field. So how do we deal with this?
Yeah, as I said, a CRM session can never be performed with one person. So you need to have a pilot who can give the aviation perspective, and a subject matter expert can be a psychologist. So two people ideally should be performing the session. So based on your behavior, your facial expressions, your gaze, if your gaze is fixated to something, which means you're judgmental. So a psychologist will be able to determine all these things. Even during training, there is a session for a feedback. So you're supposed to give a feedback to a dummy trainee. So the instructor acts as a trainee. You're supposed to give a feedback. So if you look at the trainee for over a certain period of time, which means you have already made your decision that this person is at fault. So it all depends how you have to make the person comfortable. So again, specialized knowledge has to come from SME. So obviously, a pilot or instructor cannot be a specialist, a psychologist, but again, they have to work in tandem. So that improves the quality and standards. Yes, we are doing what is called we are ticking the box, especially in prescriptive training. We are ticking the box because the system is overloaded. After every incident, accident, there are recommendations. So you add another training. So within that 4 hours, you have to do so many things that you're basically going with the flow.
Right. Another thing that I wanted to ask is that, in your opinion, who should standardize these training parameters? Do you think it should be the regulator, or it should be the airline or the operator who should be setting the standards?
The overall picture, what regulations have to be implemented has to be determined by the regulator as per the global standards and norms. So whatever ICAO says, Annex 6 requirement. So that has to be laid down. How you implement it depends on the operator. So if the operator has something which is better and beyond, in addition to what is required, so the regulator always has a means of approving that. So advanced qualification program was the first thing which came in, which was something that we will not follow the prescribed syllabus, but we will do something which gives a higher level of training and standards. So that was something different. So that had a special clearance. So even though your regulator will say that you follow what is given in Annex 6 and training requirements, but if you have something better, then why not? It all depends on the regulator to set the ball rolling. If they are more, uh, they want standards to improve, and they are open to more ideas, new ideas, then of course, why not? So again, it is a collective decision making. So all the stakeholders have to decide what is good for the industry. Like the evidence-based training, which is in discussion for a long time, but now IQ has moved on to CBTA, which is assessment also. So you have formative assessment and summative assessment. So it is a slightly different concept. So if you delay too long, there'll be another new generation training program which comes in. So you have to move away from prescriptive as soon as possible and make it more effective. So how to make it effective? You have to work with a regulator. It all means.
Right. So that was all the questions. Okay. That we've had. Captain KK
There was a
has
question. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a message from Captain KK who says that I think SME is the desired level in most basic and effective way. This skill can be achieved by passion and knowledge.
I totally agree. That, like I said, person who has mastery or also an expert, he works with his passion and not always for money. So you can, money is of course required till a certain level. Beyond that, if you go, it is always intrinsic motivation. So your performance is basically your resources, your ability, and your motivation, a combination of all three. If your motivation is low, even if you have the best of resources and ability, you cannot perform. But if your motivation is high, even if resources are low and you have the ability, you can still do a great job, a stellar job. So it is basically what drives you. So again, it is upon the industry, the regulator, and the operator to ensure that the motivation levels of a trainer are high. So how to maintain that is the responsibility of the operator. And again, the instructor or the evaluator himself should be able to motivate himself and become a mentor to others so that they also push beyond the limit. So there's no end to learning. You can learn from anywhere, but it is, you have to have an open mind. As I say, should know your limitation. When you know your limitation, then you do not push in the wrong direction. You say, okay, this is where I can reach, then I should take somebody's help or leave it to the experts to do it. So I totally agree with KK. Expertise is should what we aim for. We should aim for and achieve in the process in the long run.
Right. So Varun wants to know your thoughts on the situation in the Indian civil aviation, specifically where instructors are pushed more from seniority or past experience like the Air Force. Sometimes it is well known that a person is a poor instructor or a teacher, yet he is propped forward at times involuntarily.
So as I said before, if you look at the definition, so if you do not have the capability or the knowledge, then you lose your credibility. So once you lose your credibility, then basically nobody is taking you very seriously if you come in for a training session. So you're just going through the motions. There is no learning. Whereas if you have a learning management system and a return of investment, so ideally the operator should be worried about the money they spent on training. Every 6 months or periodically they spent thousands of dollars on training. So what is the return? What is the change that they observe? So a learning management system will be able to quantify the change. Have they seen a change? If there is no change, then why not? Has the person himself seen a change? So when you go in for training, any individual goes for training, the first question they ask is, what is in it for you? So if I go for training and I say that, why should I do this training? Because ultimately, when I go online, I will not be able to implement all these ideas. So I'm not motivated. But if the operator sends people for training and makes them a part of the SOP process or the training process, then the person is motivated. He wants to contribute and feels responsible. So that is where the corporate culture comes into effect. So the corporate culture plays a big role in getting the wrong people out, because it is a responsibility of the operator to find avenues or channels for growth. Right now, typically, there is only one channel for growth. As you are a line pilot, you become a trainer, examiner. But you have to have that attitude and aptitude. If you don't have, the operator should identify that you have a potential in some other field. So open up a channel there because you're motivated. So by default, people are put in the same line, same queue. Then, of course, because of certain pressures, you jump the queue. So that the whole system is suffering because of that. So you have to open more channels for people to vent out and use their capability. That is the need of the hour. And again, the regulations are very clear that the operator has to recommend a person of good standing and should not be biased. But those are all in black and white, but not put into practice. There's no effective system which has a check on that. So again, the role of the trainer is critical, but it's like safety. Safety is critical, but when it comes to operations, then it is operations first. Safety takes a back seat. But when an incident happens, then again it comes to the fore. So you have to have that power to the standards team to ensure that such things don't happen. So again, the corporate culture plays a big role in that.
Right. All right. I think that is all the questions that we have right now. Would we like some expert comments from?
If you have KK is an expert SME, if he wants to speak something, contribute.
I will unmute him.
Is he there?
I don't think so.
Okay. So I think KK is there if he wants to speak.
Yeah, I'm here, sir. I'm here very much.
Because I can see a chat.
Can you hear me?
Captain KK.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
No. So anyways.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much, Captain Amit, as he was saying, and I completely agree with him that one doesn't need to be, master in everything, but yes, the most important thing is SME should be able to evaluate the level of training, reach at that level, and elevate the training from that level to the desired level in the most basic and effective way, which basically is a skill, and it can be achieved through a very important, the knowledge is very important, and then of course the passion, because when you teach someone, it is like you are imparting your own part to someone. So that has to be soul satisfying. So if you have that passion, it will continue making you an expert or master in doing so, and continue satisfying you. So it shouldn't happen like in most of the time in Indian system. I don't know how it is in rest of countries. It is generally by seniority, generally by there's an understanding that most of the people get trainership, but they are getting trainership not because they should be trainer. They are just getting by by the system, by and system can only select or choose uh, few who are really expert, who really master, not all. So system cannot filter the passion. So that's what I want to just add on, that yes, the passion, and Captain Amit Singh has a passion, that's why we all are here. So he has passion about aviation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have
We have
Ajit would like. Okay, we have someone else online.
Hi, Captain Amit.
how are you?
Hello. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you very much.
Okay. I will. Okay, I'll just ask a very quick, my query in what Varun and I just missed out the name. The previous one lady has also pointed out the issue of seniority. Now, it's actually, I've also seen this thing in last 20 years. I'm seeing generally we follow this seniority concept. Whether the person who is a trainer can become a SME, it's really tough job for even corporate or airlines to decide, because most of the people, like Varun said, people have their seniority with Air Force, and initially all these Air India pilots also all from Air Force and all. Now, my query is only, do we have some kind of a procedure in which or any country right now following this procedure where you have this, like where there is a no question of this seniority and all this, where even a 30-year-old captain who is performing very well, who is a trainer, who is a doing exceptionally good, can become a SME rather than somebody in a pipeline of a seniority with 40 or 45 years of age, or maybe 20 years of experience, but is having theoretical knowledge, not having a practical knowledge, but still because of his seniority can become a trainer or a SME. So just my query is only this: do we have some kind of procedure? Because I have not seen in India.
So outside we have, like in the Middle East, some operators have first officers conducting simulators. So to a certain level, because a procedural training, you don't need that much of expertise. So certain levels are restricted. So first officer who has good attitude, aptitude. So the training department identifies people who are potential. So similarly, it is not a requirement that you have to be senior. That is the first thing in the regulations also. It is, again, as we were discussing, the trainer's aptitude test is the deciding factor. You have that attitude or aptitude. That is what will pull you along in the future. So you will be there in the long run because of that. If you come in just for the money, you're not motivated. You're working for the money, as I said. It is extrinsic motivation. So this system works, and it is basically the standards department and the regulator who have to maintain that. So it is not peculiar to India, but other places also, they have the same issues, but it is how effectively you manage the corporate culture. You open up more avenues, like you have technical or other administrative. So a person who wants to branch off in that may as well, if they find they have the attitude. But you should not push somebody into training, because it is ultimately affecting your safety. So when you think about training, you don't think about safety. You think about training and SOPs, but ultimately it boils down to safety. So if you link it to that, you see the consequences. And we have seen enough consequences of poor training and shortcuts, because every pilot who meets with an accident is qualified and competent. So why do errors happen? Why do accidents take place? So enough investigation has been carried out. So boils down to training. Safety also looks at training after all. So it's not that it is peculiar here. Ultimately, it is how your corporate culture decides. If you want to promote people who have knowledge, yes, you can promote them to a level. So they cannot go beyond certain levels. So you have to define all those things. Somebody asked about CRM. Does a trainer needs to be a CRM expert? He need not be a psychologist, but he needs to have that competence, because he needs to ultimately assess. So in CBTA, it is not the evaluator who's assessing. You are being assessed while training also, so that if there's a deficiency found, your training curriculum can be altered to enhance standards. So the regulator has oversight of the training. So ultimately it boils down to the regulator, how effectively they are controlling the standards.
Thank you. Thank you. Ball is in my court now.
Of course.
All right. We have Captain Majid who would like to say a few words. You're on, Captain Majid.
Hello, have you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
You hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi Amit, thank you for inviting me. Very interesting. And I've got only a couple of points to say. You covered most of at least what I think is right and wrong in training. I'm afraid all these vocabularies, all these definitions, and you touched upon it when you said after each accident, new things comes up and procedures. And a 4-hour simulator, it's impossible to cover all these training requirements, new recommendations. We're reactive. The whole system is reactive. It's not proactive. Let's take an example of an operation department. Operation is important, of course. Without operation, flying passengers, we don't have a job. But to make that operation efficient and make it safe, there are certain sets of requirements, training, operations, standards, safety, quality. How do we control these, the departments themselves, the management of these departments? It's okay to sit behind a desk and write rules, write instructions. By the way, just touching on this one, do we have instructor manuals? How many airlines have got instructor manuals? Very few. How many do they have standard manuals? I haven't seen any in the Gulf, at least. There are proposals, but not really established standard manuals. So the whole structure needs to be addressed. It has to be looked at, and we don't just, it is not bad. Training is not bad. Training is fine. We have to improve on what we have. On the basic subject of competency versus proficiency, I'm in an old school. I think you should be proficient to become a training captain. Again, you cover that subject. If you're not proficient, you lose credibility. But that's not only credibility, it's a personal attribute. You might endanger the safety of the passengers. It's not just about reputation, I'm good, or it's about boasting. This is not actually covered very well in operation or training management. The selection of people, you can put all sort of exams. We just said it, you know, those pilots who have crashed, how many of them? They were all competent, they had certificates, they have done the checks, competency, skill checks, line checks. But why do they crash? The same thing can go to the training department. We must improve our selection. We must have good guidelines, not just theory. You must have a very fine balance between theory and practice. I think this is where airlines should look at the next few years. You don't have to be an Einstein to become a training captain or an instructor. In fact, it could be dangerous. You need to be an average person with enough proficiency to become one level above the instructor. That is my personal word.
Right, agree. Thank you very much, Captain.
All right, I think we've finished our time. So to sum up, I would like to say that simply completing hours is not enough to be a good trainer. We need to define competencies, identify the right people, and assess them periodically in order to ensure that we have good and expert trainers. So we hope that this initiative of ours will help to take this dialogue forward, and it'll help in setting better standards in the days to come. I thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Captain Amit, for the presentation. And we hope to see you on Saturday with the safety edition of our webinar at 3 p.m. in which we will talk about role reversal errors and flight deck design philosophy. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice day and stay safe.
Thank you.